And this is his pay slip. 50 denarii go in at the top, and at the bottom, he takes home nothing. 0. And it is not a mistake. It is how the Roman army was designed. In a fortress in the Judean desert, archaeologists found a piece of papyrus with a soldier's accounts written on it. His name was Gaius Messius. He was from Beirut, and this is his pay slip. He received 50 denarii. Then the deductions start. Barley money, 16 denarii. Food, 20. Boots, 5. A leather strap for his shin wrappings, 2. A linen tunic, 7. Add those up. 16, 20, 5, 2, 7, 50. The number at the bottom of a Roman soldier's payslip is 0. The men who conquered the Mediterranean, who built the roads we still drive on, who held a frontier from Scotland to the Sahara, went home from payday with nothing in their hands. So what was the Roman army actually feeding these men? What was it actually paying them? And where did all that money go? Because once you look at the documents, the Roman legion stops looking like an army. It starts looking like a company store. Start with the pay itself, because in a few minutes I am going to show you a line in that payslip that nobody, in 2,000 years, has been able to explain. Under Augustus, a legionary earned 900 sesterces a year. That's 225 denarii, paid in 3 installments, the 1st of January, the 1st of May, the 1st of September. Julius Caesar had doubled it to that level, and then it froze. For nearly a century, nothing moved. We know exactly how the soldiers felt about it, because in the year 14, when Augustus died, the legions on the Danube mutinied, and Tacitus wrote down what one of them said. His name was Pescennius. He climbed up in front of the camp and shouted that for 10 asses a day, a man's body and soul were being valued. 10 asses a day. And out of that, he said, you pay for your own clothing, your own weapons, and your own tent. He wasn't exaggerating. We have the pay slips. He was reading the room correctly. Domitian eventually raised it to 1,200 sesterces. Septimius Severus raised it again, and Caracalla again after that. Although here I have to be honest with you, the ancient sources never give us the numbers for those last two. They just say the raise was big. Historians have been arguing about the exact figures for 30 years, and they still disagree. When someone tells you a Roman soldier under Caracalla earned precisely 900 denarii, what they mean is that one respected reconstruction says so, and another says 600. But the base pay was never really the story. The deductions were the story. So what did that food deduction buy him? Grain. Almost entirely grain. Roman soldiers lived in a unit of 8 men called a contubernium. 8 men to a tent, 8 men to a room, 8 men to a millstone. And the ration works out beautifully. 8 men, 1 modius of wheat per day. 60 modii for a cohort. 600 for a legion. Every number comes out round. That's why historians trust the reconstruction. Although, again, be careful, no Roman document anywhere says the daily ration is X. We are reading the arithmetic backwards. Per man, that's a little under a kilo of wheat a day, roughly 3,000 calories. And here's the thing that surprises people, that grain wasn't a side dish. It was the meal. The wheat alone accounted for almost the entire energy intake of a Roman soldier. Everything else, the oil, the cheese, the wine, the meat, was, in nutritional terms, a garnish. And it did not arrive as bread. It arrived as raw, unmilled grain. Every 8 men were handed a sack of wheat and a hand mill, and they ground it themselves. Then they baked it themselves, in ovens built into the rampart of the camp, so that the fire couldn't reach the tents. The most formidable military machine of the ancient world started every single morning with 8 men taking turns at a grindstone. They turned that flour into bread, into pulse, a thick wheat porridge that had been the staple food of Italy long before Romans discovered bread, and on campaign, into hard twice-baked biscuit that would survive weeks in a pack, the ancestor of every piece of army hardtack that has ever broken a soldier's tooth. There was one other grain in the Roman camp, barley, and barley was a punishment. If a unit disgraced itself, the wheat ration was withdrawn, and the men were issued barley instead, the grain you fed to animals. A whole legion could be publicly demoted to eating horse food. Hold that thought, because it's about to get confusing in a very interesting way. Now the drink. Roman soldiers did not march on wine. They marched on something called Posca, sour wine, or straight vinegar, cut with water, sometimes salt. sometimes herbs. It's the drink of slaves, of the poor, and of the army. It rehydrates you, the acidity makes questionable water safer to drink, and it doesn't get you drunk on the march. We have it in the accounts. In a wooden tablet from a fort on the northern British frontier, on the 24th of June, someone wrote down, sour wine, 2 sextarii. It's there in the ledger, between the barley and the fish sauce. And there's a moment, if you know what Posca is, that you can never read the same way again. In the Gospels, at the crucifixion, a soldier soaks a sponge and lifts it to the cross. Every translation says vinegar. The Greek word is oxos. There was no Greek word for Posca. What is on that sponge is almost certainly the soldier's own ration. He is reaching for his canteen. Whether that was mercy or mockery, the Gospels themselves don't agree on. Luke frames it as cruelty, but the liquid is the same liquid the Roman army drank on every road in the empire. And one more thing about Posca. The Emperor Hadrian used to eat in the open, in front of the troops, the food of the camp, bacon fat, cheese, and Posca. An emperor drinking vinegar in public, to prove he was one of them. It was the Roman version of a politician eating a hot dog on camera. Now, the myth. And this one has a hole in it that the payslips are about to expose. For most of the last century, it was taught that the Roman soldier was essentially a vegetarian. Grain, oil, cheese, wine. And that eating meat was a sign that something had gone wrong, that supply had failed and men were reduced to butchering the baggage animals. Then we dug up the frontier forts. In the military sites of Britain, the Rhine, and the Danube, the animal bone assemblages are dominated, overwhelmingly, by cattle. In Roman Britain's military sites, cattle can account for around 70% of the bones. These men were eating beef, constantly, in industrial quantities. So the vegetarian legionary is dead. Except, and this is the part almost nobody tells you, look back at the payslips. There's a deduction for food. There's a deduction for barley. There's a deduction for boots, for a strap, for a tunic. There is no deduction for meat, anywhere, in any surviving Roman military account. So why are the forts drowning in cow bones? Here's the best answer we have. The Roman army needed leather. Enormous, relentless quantities of leather. Every tent in the camp was a leather tent, every strap, every scabbard, every boot. One tablet from Britain mentions a single contractor tanning 170 hides. You do not get hides without killing cattle, and once you have killed the cattle, you are standing next to several hundred kilos of beef. The Roman soldier may have been eating meat not because the army fed him meat, but because the army was in the leather business, and the beef was the byproduct. That is the difference between reading bones and reading budgets. The bones tell you what went into his stomach. The budget tells you what he had a right to. Which brings us to the most human documents the Roman world has ever handed us. At Vindolanda, a fort just south of what became Hadrian's Wall, the waterlogged soil preserved hundreds of thin wooden tablets. Letters, invoices, shopping lists, written in ink, in the 90s AD, and then thrown in a rubbish heap. 46 different foodstuffs are named across them. 1 letter orders, crush beans, 2 modi, chickens, 20, 100 apples, if you can find nice ones, 100 or 200 eggs, if they're a fair price. Another is a shopping account, in cash, spices, roe deer, salt, a suckling pig, ham, venison, something for seasoning. There is beer, Celtic beer, cerveza, brewed at the fort. We even know the brewer's name, Tacitus. There is fish sauce and pork fat and olives shipped from Spain. And there is pepper. Pepper, at the edge of the known world, bought by a soldier of low rank, hauled across the entire Roman world from India. And the editors of these tablets are insistent about this, most of these accounts come from the commander's household, the prefect and his family and their slaves. This is not the private's mess tin. Roe deer and oysters are officer food. The truth is somewhere between the two documents. The soldier's legal entitlement was wheat, sour wine, and salt. What actually went into his mouth depended on what he could buy, hunt, steal or brew. And the army, it turns out, was surrounded by people selling him things. Which is exactly the problem. Because that man was being charged for everything. Look again at the deductions. Food, barley money, fodder for the unit's animals, charged to him, boots, straps, clothing. In one document there's even a deduction for the camp's Saturnalia dinner. The soldier paid for his own Christmas party. And there is a line in every surviving payslip that historians still cannot explain. A flat 1% taken off the top of every single installment, before the soldier is credited with anything. A banking fee? An accounting charge? A unit fund? Nobody knows. 2,000 years later, 1% of a Roman soldier's wage is simply gone, and we have no idea where. Add it all together and, in the best documented payslips we have, the deductions eat somewhere around 3/4 of the annual wage. Now, where does the rest of the money go? Because this is the part that got an emperor civil war. Into a savings account, a compulsory one, held in the camp, physically buried in the shrine of the standards, guarded by the standard bearer, who was, in practice, the unit's banker. Vegetius admits the reasoning out loud. Half of every imperial cash gift was deposited by the standard so that the soldier could not squander it, and, he adds, so that a man would not desert the camp where his money was. Think about that. The Roman army held its soldiers in place partly by holding their savings hostage. And it backfired spectacularly. In the year 89, a rebellious governor on the Rhine launched a coup against the Emperor Domitian, and he financed it with the deposits of 2 legions. He simply dug up the bank. Domitian's response tells you everything. He didn't abolish the deposits. He capped them. From then on, no soldier could keep more than 1,000 sesterces in the camp treasury. The pension fund of the Roman soldier had been used to buy an attempted revolution, and the state's solution was to make sure the soldiers could never save that much again. So why would anyone do this? 25 years. That was the deal. 20 years in the ranks, and 5 more retained under the standard, and Tacitus records men complaining of 30 and 40, sleeping 8 to a tent, grinding your own wheat, drinking vinegar, buying your own boots. And at the end, if you lived, and a great many didn't, the discharge bonus. Augustus fixed it at 12,000 sesterces. 12,000 sesterces is roughly 13 years of gross pay, handed over in a single lump. It was so expensive that Augustus had to invent a new tax to fund it, a 5% levy on inheritances, which the Roman rich absolutely hated. And he set up a dedicated military treasury just to pay for the pensions of his own soldiers. That was the bargain. 25 years of your life, and near zero take-home pay, in exchange for a payout at the end that could set you up as a landowner in a colony full of other veterans. And for the auxiliaries, the non-citizen troops, the men from Gaul and Syria and Thrace and Britain, the payout wasn't money at all. It was a small bronze diploma, 2 sheets of metal, hinged, stamped with a copy of an imperial decree, saying that you and your children were now Roman citizens. 25 years, for a piece of bronze that made you a Roman. Thousands of them survive. Men kept those things. They were buried with them. So when you look at that payslip from the desert, 50 denarii in, 50 denarii out, 0 at the bottom, you're not looking at a man being cheated, exactly. You're looking at the actual machinery of the Roman Empire. An army that fed itself on wheat it ground by hand, drank vinegar, paid for its own boots, banked its wages under a flag it wasn't allowed to leave, and cashed out a quarter of a century later, if it lived. Here's my question for you. Would you have taken that deal? 25 years, no savings you can touch, a bronze plaque at the end. Tell me in the comments. And if you want to know what those same men did when the money finally ran out, when the silver in the coin started disappearing and the empire quietly went bankrupt, that's the next episode.